Hi, everybody. No pun intended. That's our topic for tonight, is the recent challenge of marijuana and how a Torah society deals with it. And we want to take a look at the subject a little bit. So I'll tell you an incident. Several years ago, I was in Gateshead, and I had the privilege of having a Shabbos meal with the Gateshead Rav, Shraga Feivel Zimmerman. And he told me an interesting, something that happened to him. He got a call from a non-Jew in Scotland, called him up, and he said to him, "Hi, is this the chief rabbi of the Jews?" And he said, "Well, I'm the chief rabbi of the Gateshead community, which is about, 300 or 400 families." And he said, "Well, I have a confession to make." So the Gateshead Rav said to him, "Maybe you should speak to a priest." He goes, No, this affects the Jews." So he traveled down to Gateshead from Scotland, and he came to the Gateshead Rav's home. He said to him, "Listen, last month I was in Europe and I traveled to one of the concentration camps. And I was in one of the crematoriums, and I took a stone out of the wall in the crematorium, as I wanted it as a souvenir. And then I decided, my conscience was bothering me. I decided that I don't know what I should do with it. I decided, you're the chief rabbi of the Jews. I'll let you deal with it." He put the stone down on the Rav's table and he walked out. So the Gateshead Rav took a look at the stone. And first he had to check for any human residue. If there's any halacha, if there's any human residue, the stone would have to be buried. And he did not find any. Then he was wondering, what should he do with this stone that came out of the wall in the crematorium? So he called his Rav Dovid Zatzal, who just passed away recently. And Rav Dovid Zatzal, he told me, he thought about it for about 10 minutes. What do you do with this stone? And then he quoted him a verse from the Nach that says, "Even mikir tizak." The stone cries out from the wall. And he said, the same way that stone was in that crematorium, witnessing what it witnessed, it was fulfilling a role in the world, witnessing what it witnessed in the crematorium. And therefore, you should locate where that stone came from on your next trip to Europe. You should go into one of the camps and you should replace the stone. So the Rav eventually got back to the camp, and he was able to locate the place on the wall where that stone is supposed to go, and he managed to put the stone back. I understood, if a stone has a role to play in creation, certainly every human being has a role to play in creation. God put us in this world. He put us in this world to achieve something. As Rabbi Gottlieb had said earlier, we are here for a function. We have a purpose. And every single human being has a purpose to achieve, to accomplish in this world. And, my wife is from Columbus, Ohio. And I was in Columbus many years ago, probably about 25, 30 years ago. And I went into an optometry shop to get a new pair of frames. We had to fill out a form, where by name and where we're from and so on and so forth. So we were there on a visit. We were living here in Israel at the time. We were there on a visit. And on the form I wrote, we're living in Yerushalayim. The young lady behind the counter is obviously not Jewish. She picked up the form and she took a look at it and she went reading through with her eyes. And at a certain point she said, "Jerusalem. You're from Jerusalem. Is it fun to live in Jerusalem?" Now, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to tell you, it takes a lot to get me speechless. I was absolutely speechless. Is it fun to live in Jerusalem? My wife and I took a lot of things into consideration when we decided to live in Israel. We thought about chinuch, and we thought about growth and parnasa. Thought about a lot of things. Never once did we look at each other and say to each other, "And it's really fun to live in Jerusalem." You have your moments here that are fun. Like if you're walking on the sidewalk and a truck drives up on the sidewalk and honks you out of the way, that's fun. Or if you go into a bank and the bank teller drips falafel sauce all over your documents, that's fun. But we never really looked at it in terms of fun. And I realized then that there's an approach to life that says, well, we're here to just enjoy and try to make the most of every moment. And we grade the worthwhileness of every moment based on the fun quotient. If it's fun, then it's worth doing. If it's not fun, it's not worth doing. The theme of the Torah, my father used to say, if somebody would ask you, what is the central theme of Torah? Central theme of Torah, if you think about it, is self-control. We have to control what we say. We have to control what we think. We have to control what we look at. We have to control our ego. We have to control our selfishness. We have to control our food consumption. The entire theme of Torah is a theme of self-control. And we were put in this world, a Jew is put in this world to study Torah, obviously to incorporate Torah into our lives, and to learn not to deprive ourselves, but how to control ourselves, how to live with a certain amount of self-control. One of the remarkable, if you think about it, Rabbi Dovid Zatzal, who was the one of the Rosh Yeshivas of the famous Ponevezh Yeshiva. Rabbi Dovid Povarsky broke his arm. He went to the doctor. The doctor said, "We have to put your arm in a sling." He said, "I don't want my arm to be put in a sling." So the doctor said, "Yes, but your arm has to be immobilized. You cannot move your arm." So he said, "Then I won't move my arm." So the doctor started laughing. He said, "Yeah, but you can't move your arm the entire day." He says, "I won't move my arm the entire day." He said, "Yeah, but you can't move your arm at night when you're sleeping either." So Rabbi Dovid Povarsky said, "So I won't move my arm when I'm sleeping either." And just have to think about that. Well, even if we could control ourselves not to move our arms here, even right now I can't control myself. But even if we could control ourselves to not move our arms the entire day, to control ourselves while we're sleeping and not move our arms, can you imagine such a thing? Yet there is a level of self-control that a person can achieve that even while he's sleeping, he's in control. He or she is in control. That's something that is accomplishable. That is the purpose of the Torah, the purpose of life, to learn self-control. And the world at large, I think it's the Nike company has made billions with the slogan of "just do it." Right? The Nike slogan is "just do it." You're tempted, do it. That's what "just do it" says. And that was the original sin in Gan Eden, when Chava and the serpent have a conversation. And the serpent says to her, "Hey, listen, that fruit looks good, it smells good, it tastes good, you should indulge." And Chava says, "No, we're not allowed to indulge." And the snake is saying, "Just do it. What are you thinking about? There's no higher morality, just indulge." Isn't it remarkable, that Nike slogan, with any imagination at all, how that Nike swoosh, doesn't that look a little bit like a serpent, a little bit like a snake? With any imagination? Just do it. Don't think about the consequences and don't think about purpose. Just do it. Just indulge. So we understand that our purpose in life is to use the self-control in order to grow. We were put here to grow as people. And if a Torah Jew understands, I have a function in life, my function is to grow. So, there was an elderly man was watching some kids were playing at a park, and they had a contest. The contest was who could climb to the top of the pole the highest, the fastest, and who could get up the highest on this pole, and who could get there the fastest. This old man was standing there watching these kids compete. There was one kid who kept winning over and over and over. Each time they competed, this kid got to the top of the pole, and he got there the highest, and he got there the fastest. And this elderly man looked at him afterwards. He called the kid over and said, "I want to tell you something. I was watching your competition, and I want to tell you why it is that you won each time. All the other kids, as they climbed the pole, the higher they got, they started looking downwards. When they realized how high they were getting, they got a little nervous, and they stopped climbing. I saw you kept your eyes focused upwards. You never looked downwards. That's why you kept winning." The elderly man was the Chedushay Harim, and the little boy was his grandson, the great Sfas Emes. And he's telling us a message. The message is, keep your focus upwards. We're here to grow. We're here to achieve in life. We have to keep climbing. One of the great Rebbeim we had at Ohr Somayach, Rabbi Moshe Karlbach, he should have a refuah shlema, who wrote a magnificent commentary on Rabbi Akiva Eger. And I was once sitting next to Rabbi Karlbach, and he had his loose leaf notebook with his Gemara notes in it. And these were notes of phenomenal brilliance on Rabbi Akiva Eger, and I was leafing through his notes. And in the very back page of his notebook, he had a picture of a California redwood, a sequoia tree. And this was taken, it was a picture taken by somebody from the ground upwards. So you're sitting, you got a view of this tree and this tree extending upwards. And I was looking at this picture, and it was kind of uncharacteristic of Rabbi Carlebach to have this with his Gemara notes on the final page. And I said to him, why is this picture in your notebook? He said to me, it's a reminder. We always have to grow. We always have to grow. That's the purpose of the Torah Jew. That's the purpose. We're put here in the world of any Jew. We're put in the world to grow. We're facing an issue now, which is not a problem, it's a challenge, that not only the West Coast states have legalized marijuana, but now the East Coast states have joined. New Jersey, I think, was first, and then New York wasn't going to let them reap all the profits, so New York quickly followed suit, and now we have a situation where marijuana has been legalized. So in case we don't have enough challenges, as it is with technology and with issues that Rabbi Bradowitz was talking about, so now we have a new challenge that faces us. We have alcohol consumption, which is to a certain extent out of control, or certainly beyond the what it ever was in Jewish communities. Alcohol being consumed. There are phenomena such as kiddush clubs, and there are weddings where young people, and probably the older people as well, but certainly the young people, first you do at a wedding and you hit the liquor table, and to a certain extent there's a lack of control. There's a lack of control. Now on top of that, throw into the mix, we have this issue with marijuana. Now marijuana has joined the mix. Now before anything, it has to be very, very clear that our standards, Torah's standards, are not determined by secular standards, even if secular legalization. Before we even get to the halachic angle here, the fact that something became available, the fact that something is available doesn't mean that therefore it's okay or that we should indulge. I was once at a bus stop. I was leaving Ohr Somayach, and I was on the way home, and I had a hard candy in my mouth. One of my colleagues was standing at the bus stop, and as I got to the bus stop, I had another candy in my pockets. I pulled it out of my pocket, and I offered it to him. So first he said, okay. Then he said, you know what? No. So I said, you know what? It is kosher. I mean, the candy's kosher. Why not? He said to me, just because I feel like it doesn't mean I have to indulge. Which was pretty much an eye-opener for me. You know, why not? It's available. Yet here he was. He said, no, just because I feel like it doesn't mean I have to give in to every whim and every desire doesn't have to be gratified. Now, before anything, the fact that marijuana has been legalized, even if there would be a halachic problem, is that really something that should enter our homes? Is that really something that a person should? We know what the effects of marijuana are. I think that anybody listening tonight is well aware of the effects. For those of you who are not, it is somewhat, the effect of marijuana is it puts a person into a somewhat lethargic state, whether they feel good. If a person may feel good from it, obviously people do because that's why they indulge. But a person is very much in a subdued state, in a lethargic state. And there's going to be the next day, there's going to be some sort of also a point where a person is not very productive. It is not physiologically addicting. That means that person could quit marijuana cold turkey without any sort of physiological withdrawal symptoms. But it is certainly psychologically addicting. People who smoke marijuana often need the marijuana just to get themselves back to normal. And, you know, we try to create something. I'll tell you an amazing incident happened years ago when I was a little kid. My mother was in nursing school, at a Catholic nursing school, and one Friday night, she invited 3 nuns came to our home in full regalia. I was a little kid at the time. I was about 14, 15. And I was kind of nervous. These 3 nuns came into the house, and they sat with us at the Shabbos table. And my father, Olav Shalom, he explained to them all of what we were doing. And then he started pointing to various items in the home. He pointed to the mezuzah, and he pointed to the menorah, and there was a shofar on the shelf. And he pointed to the various svarim that were on the shelves. And it was trying to explain the menorah, whatever else that was around. And at a certain point, one of the nuns looked around. She said, "I want to tell you, this is a very holy home." Now, we never thought of it in terms of being a holy home. But a Jew takes a look and he's like, "Hey, you know what? Look at our home. Look at the type of home that we have. We have a home not only with svarim, not only with the mezuzah, not only with the menorah, but look at the home that we have. We have separate sets of dishes. Can you imagine a Torah Jew? If you stop and think about it, how many sets of dishes do you have in a Torah home? Well, you have milchiks and you have fleishiks. That's for during the week. Then you have milchiks and fleishiks for Shabbos. Then you have milchiks and fleishiks for Pesach. Then you have your fancy milchik. A Torah Jews may have 8 sets of dishes. That's a Torah home. Whereas your average person may have 1 set of dishes. So we don't even appreciate the home that we have. We don't appreciate the holiness of our home. Children in a Torah home. You know, my kids growing up, and I'm sure many other people's kids, my kids growing up Shabbos morning used to play shul. You know, one kid puts on the big bath towel over a beach towel over his shoulders. He's the chazan. We have another kid is the gabbai, and the third one is the guy who yells at the gabbai, and somebody reads the Torah, and they have a whole what do you call it over there? They play shul. It always ends with the nufra for throwing candies. And that's what's going on in a Torah home. So a person who has such a home, would they bring something into the home, whether or not, before we even get to the halachic angle, does this belong in our home? Is this something that should really be in our home, that should be invading our home? Would a person bring unbridled alcohol consumption into their home? Obviously not. A. B. In a halachic tshuva, well-known halachic response from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, which is written in 1973. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked about the halachic angle of marijuana. This is from 1973. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, for about 6 or 7 different reasons, rules unequivocally that marijuana, smoking marijuana or indulging marijuana, ingesting marijuana in any way, is forbidden. And one of the primary reasons, he says, is that a person who smokes marijuana, mitkalkelhu es hadas, he ruins, he distorts his mental process. Ve'enam yecholim lahavin dover liishuro. He can't understand things properly. That means even somebody who has smoked marijuana thinks he's being profound. That's only because of the influence of the drug. It doesn't mean that he actually is. Most commonly, a person may just read the same line over and over and over. He prevents himself from studying Torah properly, where every word of Torah is a mitzvah. And he is also preventing himself from fulfilling the mitzvah of davening and the mitzvah, other mitzvahs of the Torah. Somebody who does it without proper mental focus, it's as if he hasn't done it. That means Rav Moshe Feinstein is ruling unequivocally that marijuana smoking is usur. It's prohibited. Now, we get into an issue over here of the question of, well, you know, are there any other halachic authorities? Are there any halachic authorities? Rav Moshe Feinstein, if anybody felt, though people who don't know who Rav Moshe Feinstein was the unchallenged halachic authority of the generation. In the 1970s, Rabbi Zev Leff Shlita, he showed me, he told me about a letter. He read a letter that was written by a group of teenagers to the leaders, one of the leaders of NCSY, sometime in the late 70s, asking and indicating they want to know what the halachic angle is on regarding marijuana, and that they will commit themselves to whatever the psak is. So in this letter that was written in the NCSY, they sent back, there was a psak from, they quoted again, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, and Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik from Boston, and Rabbi Lord Emanuel Jacobowitz, who was the chief rabbi of England, all 3 of them saying unequivocally that marijuana is prohibited. Now, the idea of the mind, losing our mind, which affects, we were put in this world to exercise our free choice. And therefore, if a person, if their mind is not functioning properly, cannot exercise free choice properly, so we're kind of defeating the purpose of why we were put here. The Rambam, Maimonides, in the Laws of Deos, he says, when he talks about drunkenness, he says, somebody who gets drunk is sinning. He's disconnecting himself from the source. And the Maharal says, Noach, when Noach drank, and he drank to the point of intoxication, and it says, Vayisgal besoch oholo, he was exposed in the tent. The letters Vayisgal are the same letters. If you reverse the letters Vayisgal besoch oholo, the letters of Vayisgal are the same letters as Galus. He's exiled. That means his mind is exiled. We don't want to exile our minds. So a person who realizes and a person that accepts the halachic angle understands. Now we have to just clarify something here. When we speak about such an issue, I was once in a laboratory of a dental technician. This is a man who made false teeth and dentures and that sort of thing. And he had a sign on the door on the wall. When you walked in, there was a big sign on the wall that said, only floss those teeth you want to keep. If a person expects to keep his teeth, he or she must floss those teeth. So I often say in shiurim, I'm only speaking to people who want to do what the Torah wants us to do or what the halacha expects us to do. Somebody who says, yeah, but I disagree with Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, there's very little that I could say. We're talking about what a person does when a person is loyal to either halacha and the Torah desire, the Torah path. So it's clear from any poskim, and I would challenge anybody who wants to take it up with these poskim. I would challenge anybody, please show me a responsible posek who says it's permissible. You're not going to find one. So we're talking about something that is prohibited. Now, there's a phenomenon. There's an interesting phenomenon where I've heard of people nowadays who will actually smoke, they will smoke marijuana recreationally on weekends. Now, first of all, people who smoke marijuana recreationally on weekends, I'm skeptical whether it is only limited to weekends. I'm sure that on vacations and on probably once in a while during the week or whatever it is. But that aside, could you imagine somebody who accepts the psak of Reb Moshe and agrees, yes, marijuana is prohibited, then says, but I'll smoke recreationally on the weekend. Can you imagine a person doing the same thing with pork? Pork says, well, I keep kosher, but I only eat pork recreationally on the weekend. Or I only wear shatnez recreationally on the weekend. Or I only worship idols recreationally on the weekend. And that's unimaginable. None of us would do such a thing. And therefore, for a person who understands that what do you call it? The halacha determines our path. There's a question. I see somebody's asking a question about medical marijuana. Medical marijuana is a different question. The same way that there can be other medical treatments which may sometimes be contrary. There can be medical treatments that involve a product in the medicine which may not be kosher. But when you get into the medicinal question, that's an entirely different issue. There is always obviously the concern of taking advantage of medical marijuana or whatever it is by people, whether it's false prescriptions or bribery in order to get the prescription, whatever it is that's taking place. I remember I was in Los Angeles just before the outbreak of COVID, and I was walking on the streets of Los Angeles, and I was walking with my host, and all of a sudden I smelled, that smell. I said, "Hey, that smells like marijuana." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Where's it coming from?" And he pointed, and there's a shop. Now, I wasn't used to that. I had never seen this before. There's a shop where you go in and you have a menu, and you sit down and you order whatever brand it is that you're interested in, and so on and so forth. Again, if we're bound by halacha, a person has to ask himself, do I see myself as bound by halacha? If I see myself bound by halacha, then there's no question over here. And therefore, a person understands that it may not always be easy. I want to tell you an interesting halachic question that came up. This is documented. It's documented, and it went to the Supreme Court of either the state of New York or the United States. I'm not sure which one. You could find it online. The following incident took place. There was a couple that was engaged, and they went off to they went for their date. They went to a ski resort, and they were on the ski lift, and at a certain point, it was late afternoon, and the ski lift malfunctioned. They were stuck dangling up in the air on the ski lift. And it was getting dark. They started calling for help. And everybody from the resort, the hired help had already left. It was late in the afternoon. And here they were stuck on the ski lift. And they realized at a certain point that they had an issue of yichud. Yichud is the prohibition of a non-married couple, male and female, being alone in a secluded area, whether it's behind a closed door, whether it's behind in an indoor area, it could be an outdoor secluded area. And they realized that they had this issue of, that they had a problem of yichud. So the young lady, the Kala, she jumped off the ski lift in order to avoid this problem. She ended up breaking both her legs. I know what you're wondering. I know. Why did she jump and not him? I don't know. The answer is I don't know. Often it is the women who are somewhat more conscientious of the halacha. I'm not sure. Or maybe she was pushed. Don't know. At the end of the day, she jumped off the ski lift. Now, we were discussing this. What is the halacha? What is the halacha? The halacha, is it a yehareg vel yam, or does one have to give up their life to avoid this prohibition because it is somewhat related to immorality? Or is it something that is only rabbinic? What is exactly the status? And we were discussing this. We did not come to a conclusion. One thing was clear. She did it because she thought that's what she had to do, as difficult as it was. So sometimes in life, the challenge may be difficult, especially somebody who grew up perhaps in the 70s and 60s, 70s, or 80s. Somebody may have been conditioned to smoking marijuana and now faces the challenge of knowing and realizing that this is not something they should be indulging in. Plus, there's a further challenge. What do we do about our teenage kids who are a little less mature in their choices? And now that it's been legalized, it becomes much more accessible to them. That's a very big challenge for parents. And the only thing that I could advise parents is that there has to be a reinforcement in the family. This is beyond the scope of what we have time to discuss tonight. But parents have to reinforce what are our values, what's our purpose, what's our goal, and what's our direction. And people have to have and understand and know what the direction is in life. If a person doesn't know the direction, they don't know where they're trying to get to, it's very difficult to establish values. My brother lives here in Israel in a place called Telstone. I don't know if any of you are aware. Telstone is a small town, about 20, 25 minutes outside Yerushalayim. And one night he was outside walking in Telstone, and he saw a young man on the sidewalk with a suitcase. And this young man says to him with a thick French accent, he says, "Where is Eliyahu on Novi Street, number 17? My brother says to him, "There is no Eliyahu on Novi Street here." He says, yes, I'm looking for Eliyahu on Novi Street 17 in Bnei Brak. My brother said to him, "There is an Eliyahu on Novi Street in Bnei Brak, but you are not in Bnei Brak, you're in Telstone." And he said, no, I'm in Bnei Brak. My brother said to him, "I've been living here for over 30 years, and I'm pretty sure that this is Telstone, not Bnei Brak." And what it turned out was this young man had gotten into a cab. He was a tourist in Israel. He got into a cab with an Arab driver, and he told him he needs to get the Eliyahu on Novi Street, number 17 in Bnei Brak. Well, the Arab picked up that he was clueless, drove 20 minutes instead of the hour that it takes to Bnei Brak. He drove 20 minutes into Telstone. He said, "You're in Bnei Brak." He pointed to a building and said, "That's Eliyahu on Novi Street, number 17. And the guy got out of the cab, and not only he dropped him off in Telstone, but while the young man was taking his suitcase out of the back of the cab, he had his suit jacket draped over the seat, and the Arab helped himself to his wallet as well. So the Musar lesson is that a person has to know where he's going and how to get there. So if parents want to communicate with their kids, and teenagers who are so prone to peer pressure and to various temptations, then obviously the parents have to figure out a way of communicating with their kids, trying to define purpose, trying to define where we're going, and hoping that their children, hoping the relationship is such that the children will make the correct choices. But it is a challenge. Let's not mince words. It is very much a challenge that is far more widespread, even in the Torah community, than many people would like to either acknowledge or admit. There are many people who just bury their heads in the sand because they don't want to face the issues. There's more sophisticated ways of ingesting marijuana today. It can be put into a cartridge and screwed onto something that looks like an electronic cigarette. And it requires a tremendous amount of communication and a goal definition in a family, and certainly the parental example. If the parents themselves are going to indulge, and this applies to alcohol consumption as well, we can't expect our kids to be any different. Certainly teenagers who see parents doing one thing and trying to communicate a different message, that doesn't work. Kids aren't going to listen to parents when the parents themselves are not living up to the standards that they expect their kids to. And therefore, a person has to know that it may be difficult. If some of you may remember years ago, I'm guessing it was about 10 years ago, when we had the sheitel crisis. If any of you remember the famous sheitel crisis, where the wigs, it was discovered that certain companies were getting their wig hair from India. If you remember, some of you may remember that. They were getting their wig hair from India. And in India, the wig hair was being used. It was at the time, there was a certain amount of ambiguity. It wasn't clear exactly what was happening, but there was a concern that the wig hair was being used in idol worship service. People would come to this, there was a certain town somewhere in India, and the priests had a business where the worshipers would come and they would shave their hair off. They grew their hair for a couple of years and they would shave it off. And then there was a question, were they shaving it off as part of the idol worshiping service? Now, if it was actually part of the idol worshiping service as opposed to being shaved off before they went into the idol, if it was part of the idol worshiping service, all poskim agreed that hair becomes prohibited to get any benefit from, which means wigs, sheitels that were made out of that hair would be prohibited to use, to wear, or to even sell and get any benefit. They'd have to be destroyed. One would not get any benefit. And there were many, many religious women who wore wigs from these companies who, until it was determined what the status was, they simply would not wear the wigs. Now, there was one teacher of a fourth grade class who wore a wig every day. She wore a wig. She was never seen anywhere without her sheitel. And one day she walked into class and she was wearing a tichel. She was wearing the scarf headdress. When she walked in, the little girls were shocked. They couldn't believe it. There was a teacher who never went anywhere without a sheitel, and she was wearing a tichel. So one of the girls said to her, why are you wearing a tichel? She said, well, you may have heard that the Rabbanim have prohibited wearing sheitels. If the Rabbanim have prohibited wearing sheitels, I cannot wear a sheitel. And that's why I'm wearing a tichel. The girls were just so impressed that the teacher, as difficult as it was for her, the teacher was willing to not wear her tichel. It's difficult. Sometimes the halacha is difficult. But then one of the 9-year-old girls stood up and she reached her hand onto her head and she pulled off a wig. And underneath she had no hair. This little girl said, nobody knows about it here, but for the last few months I've not been well. I've been undergoing treatment. My hair has fallen out and I've been wearing a sheitel. I've been wearing a wig. But if the Rabbanim have said that I'm not allowed to wear it, I'm not going to wear it. Can you imagine? A 9-year-old girl. That's exactly what our attitude is. Halacha, there are certain times where halacha is very easy to keep. Certain times halacha, we get used to it. Can't turn lights on Shabbos. We don't eat certain foods. Not a challenge for most of us. What about when halacha gets a little tougher, when there's a challenge? The Torah just says, listen, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to keep the halacha. That's something that I'm going to do. And I'm going to do it regardless of how difficult it is. So yes, we're facing a challenge. Yes, there are people, perhaps even listening, who may be individually connected to this challenge. You may know people who are connected. You may have children who are connected. But the Torah attitude is that the fact that it's challenging or the fact that it's difficult, we do what we have to do. That's the Torah attitude. I want to share with you a remarkable thought. The Torah says by Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu was on his way to see Yosef. He hears that Yosef is alive. And Yaakov says, Vayomer Yisrael, Rav od Yosef ben Ichai. Yosef is still alive. Elcha ve'erenu b'terem amos. I want to go see him before I die. Well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? Isn't it obvious that if he's going to go see him, he's going to see him before he dies? You're not going to see him after you die. You're going to see him b'terem amos. I want to go see Yosef before I die. Okay, we understand the plain meaning that Yaakov Avinu is saying. I want to go, I want to make sure to get it in before I die. But I heard a much deeper explanation. They say, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman once went with a group of disciples to see the Chafetz Chaim. And he told the disciples, I want to take you to the Chafetz Chaim. To see the Chafetz Chaim in this world. Because in the world to come, you're not going to be able to see him. He's going to be in such a high place, you won't be able to see him in the world to come. So I want you to see him in this world. So he took his disciples to see the Chafetz Chaim. When he got to the great Chafetz Chaim, the Chafetz Chaim looked around the room and he said, I'm glad you came to see me. Because I want to be able to see you in this world. Because in the world to come, I'm not going to be able to see you. You're going to be in such a high place. The disciples were a bit shocked. The Chafetz Chaim telling them that he won't be able to see them in the world to come. And the Chafetz Chaim mentioned this idea. Why does Yaakov Avinu say to Yosef, I want to see him before I die? You know what Yaakov Avinu was saying? Yaakov Avinu was saying, the tests that Yosef had, the tests that Yosef passed with Mrs. Potiphar, being in Egypt, in a den of iniquity, and he withstood the tests, he withstood the temptations. I want to see him before I die, because after I die, I'm not going to be able to see him. He's going to be in such a high place because of the tests that he has passed. My friends, I think that refers to everything in our generation, not only the marijuana tests that we're facing. Alcohol, technology, valuelessness of the world. All of these things are tests. And we were obviously chosen to be put into this generation because we've got the capability to pass the tests. But the difficulty of the tests, that picks the person up. Every single person out there, every one of you, is on such a high level because living in this generation, which is a generation of tests. And I want to tell you even more. The unimaginable reward a person gets for every moment of restraint. No matter what a person is going through. When a person is, for example, the Vilna Gaon says for every moment that a person doesn't say something inappropriate that he shouldn't say, he or she shouldn't say, for every moment of restraint, a person will get reward that even the malachim, even the angels cannot imagine the magnitude of the reward. Because angels probably have good imaginations. And for every moment of restraint, not saying what a person shouldn't say, they're going to gain a reward that even the malachim cannot access. Can you imagine such a thing? And I'm going to take it even further. You know, there's a concept in halacha, that one of the most powerful ideas I've ever heard. There's a concept in halacha of miktsas hayom kekulo. Part of the day counts as a whole day. So, for example, if a person, for example, is sitting Shiva, there's 7 days of Shiva. But if a person manages to sit Shiva for 5 minutes before the sun sets, that counts as a full day. Miktsas hayom kekulo. So, for example, if a body person is buried and the family then sits in the home Shiva for 5 minutes before Shkia, before the sun goes down, that means they've already counted 1 day of the Shiva period. So the Sfas Emes says that there's a concept of giving up a desire. And when we give up a desire, imagine a person sees a delicious, delectable food in front of them, then finds out that there's some halachic question instead of kashrus. And a person, therefore, does not indulge. It's painful. It hurts. At that moment, the Sfas Emes says, we've given up part of our life. It's as if part of our life has been taken. Says the Sfas Emes, giving up part of your life is like giving up your entire life. It's like a person died al kiddush Hashem. We just died to sanctify God's name. The same way one has to give up his life not to worship idols or not to commit murder or adultery, and a person would have to die to sanctify God's name rather than transgress. At the moment that a person overcomes the desire to indulge, at that moment it's as if they've died on Kiddush Hashem. That's going to apply whether we're tempted by alcohol, whether we're tempted by marijuana, whether we're tempted by anything inappropriate. It hurts to have to restrain ourselves. That restraint is priceless. That restraint grants us, it gets us a reward that is beyond the imagination of even the malachim. Finally, just want to end with an interesting story I once heard. There's a rabbi went off to France, went to a shul in France. He saw a Jew davening. And this Jew, some people daven and they daven very controlled manner. There's very little movement. Sometimes people are a little bit more active, and sometimes people are downright. They look like they're in a gym. And this guy was all over the place davening. He was swinging and dancing and shuckling away. And the Rav was watching him. And after the davening, he approached this man and he said, Rabbi, could I ask you a question? I was enchanted by watching your davening. It was mesmerizing. I'm just wondering, why were you moving around so much? So the Jew said to him, I want to tell you something. When I was a little boy, my mother called me into the kitchen. I was about 5, 6 years old. She filled up a pitcher with water all the way to the top, and she put it on the kitchen table. She filled it all the way to the top, and she shook the kitchen table. When she shook the kitchen table, some of the water spilled over. And she said to me, Yitzchak, that pitcher represents the Ribono Shel Olam. That pitcher represents Hashem. Hashem is a kel mole rachamim. He is a God who is filled with mercy. Our job is to figure out how to get some of that mercy, some of that rachamim to spill over on us. So he says, Rabbi, I'm an unsophisticated Jew. I'm a very simple Jew. I don't understand exactly the words of davening. But I figured if I move around and I jump around during the davening, maybe I'll be able to get HaKadosh Baruch Hu to spill some of that mercy. I'll shake some of that rachamim out, and it'll spill over on us. So I think we live in a time, we've had our challenges, we've had various ordeals, and now we have other challenges with whether it's marijuana or all the other things that we've mentioned. And we are so much in need of rachamim, so much in need of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's help to overcome these challenges, and so much in need of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mercy for the entire Jewish people. Therefore, like everything else, at the end of the day, whatever the challenge is, it begins, continues, and ends with tefillah. There has to be davening. And if we daven, we'll have the siyata d'shmaya that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will help us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will accept our tefillahs. He'll help us through the challenges, our families, help us through the challenges, the various obstacles that face us. Have mercy on the Jewish people. Be'ezer Hashem will have all sorts of brachos in Yeshua's B'karov. Amen. So, good night, everybody who's in Israel, and good afternoon to everybody who's outside of Israel. Thank you very much for listening.